Good afternoon, everybody. This is Bassam Haddad, and I am delighted to be joined today by Dr. Shir Hever, who is going to address our five-part series under the title of Israel's Zombie Economy. The first episode is what we will feature today under the title The War Currency. Shir, how are you? Welcome to this series.
Thanks for having me, Bassam.
Very happy to have you, and I will proceed directly to the questions. We're going to do a five-part series of about 25 minutes or so each, and we will end with any closing comments you'd like to have or to make. But first, I will introduce, despite your objection, I will introduce your bio this first time in almost in full, and then we will be satisfied with a short version going forward. Dr. Shir Hever, and please feel free to correct my pronunciation. Dr. Shir Hever is an economist and political scientist. He was born in and grew up in Jerusalem, now living in Germany after giving up his Israeli citizenship. He is the managing director of the Alliance for Justice Between Israelis and Palestinians, a member of the Jewish Voice for a Just Peace in the Middle East, and until recently was the coordinator of the military embargo campaign of BDS. Shir Hever studies the political economy of Israel's occupation, apartheid, and the arms trade. His most recent book is The Privatization of Israeli Security from Pluto Press in 2017. And with this, Shir, I understand that you are ready to go from the get-go, so we will get to the questions, as this is one of the topics that a lot of people assume they know something about, but very few people actually know quite a bit about. And we are happy to have you to shed some light on a very important aspect that gets lost in the daily slaughter we are observing in Gaza. So let me get to it with our first question, which I will put to you. Feel free to answer however you wish, and we probably have only a few questions per episode. So starting with the first question, let me share that first, as we know, or as many people know, thousands of Israeli soldiers were injured or killed or actually collapsed from physical and mental exhaustion. As well, thousands of deserters have been, recorded and registered, including those who left the country. And after the commander-in-chief specifically said that there are not enough soldiers for the current operation in Gaza, still we witness the campaign continue and intensify quite rapidly, actually, these days. And there seems to be enough soldiers. How is this possible given the shortage that we have alluded to?
Right. And indeed, this is a question that is very divisive and very mysterious because Israel is using a lot of force in Gaza, and also, as I'm sure you know, is attacking a lot of countries in the Middle East, 6 countries so far. There is a need for a lot of soldiers. And within Israel, the main discussion about this is about the role of the ultra-Orthodox. The ultra-Orthodox Jews, most of them consider themselves to be anti-Zionist, even if they support the government, but they support it with prayers and certainly not with military service. And there is this fantasy that somehow they will be convinced to join the military, but this is not going to happen. So nevertheless, we have to ask the question, where are the soldiers coming from? Eyal Zamir is the current commander-in-chief. He has defiantly gone to the press against the government, saying that he doesn't have enough soldiers. So this is really a divisive point. But we have to remember that Israel's regime is based not on a constitution and checks and balances in a way that a democratic government is supposed to function, but rather on traditions within a settler society, which are supposed to create the illusion, the semblance of a democratic government. But it doesn't really exist. So the idea is that you have the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Finance, which are always at odds with one another. The Minister of Defense traditionally tries to get as many resources as possible to fight wars, to conquer territory, and so on. The Ministry of Finance has the role of putting some checks and balances on this, putting the brakes, saying we cannot afford it. It will cost too much international pressure and boycotts and sanctions, and the resources are not enough. At the moment, the Minister of Finance in Israel is Bezalel Smotrich. I assume that our viewers and listeners are aware who this person is. Smotrich is a messianic, fascist, extremist leader who doesn't care about the Ministry of Finance at all. He's the Minister of Finance, but that doesn't concern him in the least. He's willing to give the Ministry of Defense everything they want and need in order to wage war in Gaza. And so the Ministry of Defense has issued a new kind of currency. And this is the topic of our conversation today, which is a day of reserve token. Now, traditionally in Israel, reservists, when they serve in the military and they already are civilians and they just do their reserve duty when called upon, then they are paid as reservists exactly the same amount that they would have been paid in their civilian life. So they would be, if they are receiving the minimum wage, they will keep getting the minimum wage. If they are unemployed, they will get unemployment benefits, but nothing more. And if they are actually, high-tech programmers making six-figure salaries, then they're supposed to make those six-figure salaries even as reservists, which has been a point of contention for the military. But now, with the current genocide in Gaza, they have changed the rules and decided that all the reservists, regardless of what they do in the reserve life, would receive 29,000 shekels per month. This is equivalent to about $9,000, more or less, per month, which is more than twice the average wage in Israel and more than 5 times the minimum wage in Israel. So it's a lot of money. And for tens of thousands of Israelis who lost their jobs, who lost their source of income and employment, and because they've served so long as reservists, and also because the Israeli economy is tanking, something that we will discuss more in our next episodes, then they see reserve duty and this very high salary as a way out. And they receive those tokens, they reserve tokens as payment for serving in the military. But it's not only that the amount of money has been increased, but also the way that it is being paid is now different. Because normally the Ministry of Defense would just transfer the money directly to reservists, but now the officers themselves get those tokens to distribute as they see fit. Now, a lot of the units, I would say the vast majority of the units in the Israeli military are lacking key personnel. The units are not able to function. You cannot have like an armored division if you don't have drivers. The tanks won't go anywhere. So officers are advertising on WhatsApp and writing, we need drivers. And even if you're not from our unit, come and do some reserve duty in our unit as a tank driver, and we will pay you with those reserve duty tokens. And some jobs are so difficult and rare that the officers are saying, you know what, come and work for us for 4 days, but we will pay you 6 days, as if you've worked for 6 days. And this way, you really see how Israel is becoming a mercenary army. And you also see how these reserve tokens are being used to buy not only services like reserve duty, but also to buy goods. This is a very famous case that has been only published in the Hebrew media in Israel. I haven't seen any English publication of it. When officers decided that they wanted to buy meat for the soldiers from a butcher's shop, and they paid with reserve duty tokens instead of cash. So this creates massive expenditure in order to get those enough soldiers to serve. Basically, you have this army of soldiers who are not associated with particular units and wandering from one unit to the next as a gig economy military, and they have given up on their jobs in the civilian market if they had them at all. And I hear from Israeli journalists who are saying that gig economy jobs in Israel, like waiters in restaurants or couriers, like food carriers and things like this, then nobody's doing that anymore if they are of military age, because it's much more lucrative to serve in the military in the reserves. And this is how Israel is filling its ranks.
Thank you, Shir. You're going to ruin this for everyone because of how concise you are, but I appreciate that very much. We're going to move to the second question, which is actually quite related as you describe a policy of printing money. Does this not lead to devaluation of the Israeli currency and inflation? So how is this dealt with in practice?
One thing we still don't know is how, by the end of the year or by the end of the budget year, the Ministry of Defense is going to balance the budget, because the Ministry of Defense receives, according to the Israeli budget, this budget was approved in March last year. March this year. In March this year, by the Israeli Knesset, just as Israel violated the ceasefire. So the budget was written under a ceasefire, assuming that the fighting will not be resumed. Then Israel broke the ceasefire. The Knesset just gave it stamp of approval, but in the reality is that already the Ministry of Defense is spending far more than what it was allocated according to the budget. So when the discrepancy will be discovered and exposed, a lot of things can happen. For example, Israel could lose further ratings on its credit rating agencies. A lot of investors will panic. We don't know yet. But I want to talk about the age of the Israelis who are in senior positions in the Ministry of Finance, Smotrich himself, and so on. These are people who are relatively young, in the sense that they don't remember the 80s, or maybe they were children in the 80s, but Israel has actually gone through a very similar situation in the early 80s. I myself was a child. I cannot speak out of my own memory, but I did study it because it was a very unique economic phenomenon in which Israel experienced a surge in the stock market in the early 80s at the same time that there was hyperinflation. And an Israeli economist, her name was Esther Alexander. She passed away in 2003. She wrote a book called "The Power of Equilibrium in the Economy," and she was a very progressive political economist, and her findings were mostly forgotten and ignored, mainly because she was a woman, and the Israeli Department of Economics is a very, very masculine department. Um, but she said this surge in the stock exchange and the inflation are not contradictory, but rather cause and effect, because the banks in those years have regulated the Israeli stock market and manipulated the share prices by they used insider information, and they made sure that the stock prices keep going up at a very high rate. And a lot of Israelis were taken by this easy profit scheme, and started to invest more and more of their money in the stock market, which is exactly how the banks made a huge profit, because they took this money and sold the shares that they were buying themselves to regulate the price. And then Israelis started even to take loans so they can buy shares, because you could make a very, very high rate of interest on your shares. And this created a competing currency in the Israeli economy. This caused a massive surge in the purchasing power of people, just in terms of the money available to them, but the goods and services did not multiply at the same rate. So this caused inflation. The inflation was between 100% and 400% in the years 1981 to 1984. And then in 1983, all the banks in Israel went bankrupt on the same day, when there was not enough money to keep manipulating the share prices, and the government nationalized the banks. and in 1985 implemented a very restrictive, very neoliberal policy to restructure the government and to implement laws against those banks. There were a lot of investigations, court cases against the banks for using inside information and manipulating the stock market. So that was an example of how the economy can overheat with manipulation by creating this kind of competing currency. And people have the normal currency, but also an extra kind of currency, and the central bank loses control and the inflation gets out of hand. And now we're seeing exactly the same thing. We're seeing that the government itself has allowed a competing currency to be printed basically by the Ministry of Defense. And the CEO or the chief manager of the Ministry of Finance, somebody who is not Smotrich, but rather a civil servant who works for Smotrich, has raised the alarm and said this has to stop right away. This is very, very dangerous for the Israeli economy because indeed Israel is seeing rising inflation. I think we are not seeing the same level of inflation that that Israel has experienced in the 80s because people are not really using this money to buy just goods and services normally, but they're using this money in order to make up for the loss of income because of the economic crisis. So you have a lot of families that they've lost all of their income and the only income is coming from the reserve duty. So because the money is coming in exchange for lost income from other sources, then it doesn't increase the actual purchasing power of the population by so much. And so the inflation still hasn't gotten out of hand. But it is high. The cost of living is very high. And we have to pay close attention. This money is not coming out of any kind of productive engagement in the economy. The reservists are not building anything. They're only destroying and killing. And therefore, the loss of the generation of income in agriculture and industry and education and health, all of these things are going down. So there is no basis for this spending. And the only way that the Israeli government can continue to finance it is by going deeper and deeper into debt.
Thanks, Shir. I would like to continue and ask about a broader question, which is very much related, starting with the fact that, I mean, Israel is not a democracy, but it is a part of the OECD and receives credit ratings from Moody's and S&P. And please feel free to expand on these terms. How is it possible to spend unlimited amounts of money, as we are witnessing, when the tax base has not grown? From what I know and from speaking with you and others, in other words, there is no economic growth, and yet the investors are not panicking, and things seem to be proceeding in a business as usual frame of mind.
Well, the short answer is that this is made possible by Western complicity. But I think I need to explain how this complicity comes to be. Israel is indeed a member of the OECD, and this is something that I've worked quite intensively because I wrote reports to the OECD in 2010 when Israel was in the process of ascending to the OECD, and warned the OECD, and I spoke to some of their economists, that the reports that Israel is sharing with the OECD are simply false. The thing is that the OECD just refused to address the issue that Israel is reporting about its economy under the assumption that in this territory of Palestine that is completely under Israeli control, there are people who are part of the reports, part of the economy, which are the citizens of Israel, overwhelmingly Jews, and including the settlers in the West Bank and in the Syrian Golan. And then you have the Palestinians who are just invisible. They're not in the reports. If you include the entire population of Palestine, as one unit of almost 16 million people, then these 16 million people are certainly not do not qualify as a state, as a member of the OECD, because it is a state with extremely high unemployment, extremely high inequality, a low standard of living, and the OECD, which is supposed to be an organization for advanced developed economies, would not accept such a state. But Israel said, "Oh, but we're only applying to the OECD as the Israeli citizens, even though the whole territory is under our control, and we're exploiting the natural resources and the labor of Palestinians as well." So this is where the complicity begins. But this is a story from 2010. Now we're in 2025, and we see the complicity is much deeper than just organizations like the OECD. The complicity is with the financial newspapers like the Financial Times or the Wall Street Journal, who are refusing to report just how deeply flawed Israel's economy is, how Israeli journalists are saying that the state budget has nothing to do with reality, and it's just empty words on paper without any control, any regulation. Normally, when a state is managed in this way, then indeed it goes bankrupt right away. And Israel doesn't go bankrupt because the financial newspapers are lying to their own readers. And speculators, investors from around the world who are considering maybe we should buy Israel bonds, maybe we should invest in an Israeli company. Obviously, morally, this is very wrong. Nobody should do this. Legally, there is a tremendous legal risk because these companies, the Israeli companies, are facing are complicit in very serious war crimes against humanity, including the crime of genocide, which means that these companies don't have a very long life expectancy, and investing in them is rather foolish. But the foolishness is the point, that for those investors who are not aware just how bad the situation is, and they don't read Hebrew, then they continue to invest. And I think this is the only reason that the Israeli economy has somehow managed to keep plodding along, and the debt hasn't got out of control yet. But I do want to say that there are cracks in this complicity, and there are some beams of light coming. The United Nations just almost doubled the number of companies listed on its blacklist of companies that are engaged in the occupation. And I'm happy to see that finally they included the German company Heidelberg Cement. It's called Heidelberg Materials now, which is one of the companies that is exploiting Palestinian resources and tried to hide it, but they cannot hide it anymore. And you see then pension funds which are beginning to divest in higher and higher rapidity, higher speed from Israeli companies, because they want to protect their investments of the pensioners who are saving for their pensions, but also because they don't want to be complicit in those crimes. So I think that this wall of ignoring the reality is falling apart.
Shir, I'm not going to go on because that will be impinging on the next episode. I just want to ask you a quick question that is on probably a lot of people's minds regarding how you said that this information is available. Of course, you have access to it, and a lot of the links that you have sent me are from Haaretz and other publications in Hebrew in Israel. It's one thing for quote unquote Israelis not to know exactly what's happening in Gaza, even though this is disputed, because they don't want to know, or they don't care, or they just want this to continue and are not paying attention. It's another not to know what's happening inside Israel regarding what actually affects the livelihood of all Israelis. How do we explain that, given Israel has a decent per capita income, the population is quite wired, they're connected, they have access? How do we explain that sort of level of lack of knowing or ignorance, or the kinds of things that you shared that they are not aware of as a public in general.
Yeah, Bassam, I think that most citizens in countries like, in West Europe or in North America don't really know what is the tax base of their country. Even people who are well educated, you don't know how much is the budget deficit every particular year and how is it financed exactly. You really need to be an economist to get into the nitty gritty of those details. But you have a certain trust that the government is managing those things and that there is some regulation and there's some oversight by international bodies and so on, by the central bank, that they're making sure that these things don't get out of hand. And if they do get out of hand, like in Argentina, for example, in 2000, or in Greece in 2007, then it's a big story. So the assumption is that most governments are not doing this. I think most Israelis try to convince themselves that things are okay and it's not getting out of hand, and they don't want to really go into the nitty gritty. But some Israelis are actually just looking around and they say, oh, well, it looks like the school is not working and the university is not opening the new school year because there's not enough students. They're all in reserve duty and many of the professors are gone, and the hospitals are barely functioning, and it takes forever to get an appointment with a doctor. And all these things are giving people the impression that no, it's not really managed okay. There is a crisis, and the crisis is getting worse and worse. And those Israelis who have at least the courage to look reality straight on and not to close their eyes, they pack their bags and leave if they can. If they have the possibility to leave, they leave. And one issue is that Israelis who have money, who have their savings through various funds and bonds and things like this, have shifted, according to Israeli banks, more than 50% of their investments abroad. More than 50%, because they have lost faith in the future of the Israeli economy. And I think those Israelis who are more aware, as you say, of the reality around them than the financial media in the world, in the English-speaking world, which is refusing to report about this, they are voting with their feet.
Thanks, Shir, and I think we will leave it at that. We are going to join you. I will be joining you, perhaps even in person, shortly for the remaining parts, at least some of them, and just to share with our viewers what to expect. Here are the upcoming conversations. The first session was today's, the war currency. The second is coming up soon, the counter-revolution of the Israeli arms industry. Third is Israel's breakdown into tribes. Fourth, which I think a lot of people will be interested in, is Israel's economy on the verge of collapse? And then finally, the disinformation bubble. And with that, Shir, I'd like to thank you so much for giving us your time and sharing your thoughts. I will put this online on actually just people so people can see. All right. So we will be joining everyone again soon. And I'll leave you with any last words before we break.
Thank you very much, Bassam, for having me.
All right, that's that's pretty concise. You're actually giving me ideas about my following conversations. Shukran. Thank you, Shir, and hopefully we will see you soon. All right, take care.